This is a difficult period in our history. It is a related war, and we are obliged to win. And if we do not, there will be no peace. For what is the point of a peace in which Russia does not exist? 4 years, and it will go on for as long as necessary, until we accomplish the objectives formulated and set by our Commander-in-Chief, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Colonel Solovyov has concluded his report.
4 years ago, February 2022, the Russians launched a full-scale war against Ukraine. And actually, this war has been going on for 12 years. Moscow is not in any hurry to end it. Quite the opposite. They're already bragging about victory and calling it the most successful operation in their history. But wait, there is more. It's not just about that. Ukraine is now being accused of, get this, trying to get nuclear bombs. Allegedly, France and the UK are just waiting to hand them over to Kyiv. Yeah, makes total sense. New week, new Russian nonsense. I'm Sofia and this is Spin Snipers, where we tear apart Kremlin drama and serve up the brutal facts fast.
At present, the special military operation is probably the most successful military campaign in the country's history. The amount of territory returned to Russia and the population size far exceed the figures of the Great Patriotic War, even when conducting military operations against a united Europe as in 1941 to 1945, and moreover, with its significant support from the United States.
Since the full-scale invasion began, Russia has suffered hundreds of thousands of military casualties, over 1.2 million killed, wounded or taken out of action, according to Ukrainian and Western estimates. Now, sure, it's not quite on the scale of World War II, but in absolute numbers, this is Russia's largest war in 80 years. For modern Russia, these losses are unprecedented since 1945, far exceeding the casualties in Afghanistan and Chechnya by tens of times. And what does Russia do? Pretends it's not happening. Propagandists are already calling this a successful military operation. Yeah, successful if your goal is to lose more soldiers than any other conflict in decades.
Objectively speaking, if you look only at the numbers, this is one of the most, if not the most, successful military operations carried out by the Russian army. In terms of losses, it is simply incomparable. Western analysts try to estimate our losses. They take population decline, compare it year by year, and they do not see any spike on our side. Ukraine, on the other hand, has a severe spike, but they do not see one for us. So no matter what they try to claim, they cannot demonstrate it statistically, neither by the number of new graves, whatever methods exist, nor through telephone surveys. All their narratives about the Red Army's supposedly huge multi-million losses are not supported in any way, just as Ukraine's lies about supposedly losing no one are equally untrue.
So let's ask the question, what's the so-called success here? Strategic goals? Not achieved. And the longer this war drags on, the less likely they become. Russia wants to be a regional superpower, but clearly it cannot. Let's also talk territory, in case you still think this is why the largest country in the world went to war. A few facts. In the first days and months, Russia advanced quickly in the south and east of Ukraine, taking significant parts of Donbas and southern regions by early summer 2022. But by spring 2022, Kyiv and Chernihiv regions were fully liberated. After Ukraine's counteroffensive operations at the end of 2022, Russia lost parts of Kharkiv and Kherson regions. From the start of 2023 to early 2026, Russia's gains were minimal, just a few thousand square kilometers, only a few % of Ukraine. Compared to 2022, the pace of conquest slowed dramatically. Basically, right now everything is stuck. Russia is sacrificing thousands of soldiers' lives just to occupy some random village. And that, apparently, is what they call their most successful military operation. Yeah, sure.
Over 400 of our cities and settlements were destroyed as a result of Germany's aggression. Today, we have largely managed to avoid conducting military operations on our own territory, except for long-range missile strikes deep into our territory. The tragedy in the Kursk region, Belgorod, parts of Bryansk, and, of course, Kherson and Zaporizhzhia. But this is not comparable to the most difficult period when the war swept across the European part of the Soviet Union. Here, too, if you look at it, our economy has, for a long time, remained resilient despite sanctions, and has now entered a slowdown mode solely in order to make decisions on fighting inflation. And look at the growth rates of the defense industrial complex. Rates that were unprecedented even during Soviet times.
Here is the scene. Russia comparing its war in Ukraine to World War II? Totally cynical. Just a tool to justify the aggression against a peaceful neighbor. Let's be clear, this war was started by Russia, and it's Russia that could end it. Simple as that. Pull your troops out, and attacks on Kursk, Belgorod, Bryansk, all of it stops immediately. But no, Russia wants to live in its fantasy world, attacking neighbors, freezing people in winter, targeting homes, schools and civilian infrastructure, and thinking that there will be no response. And yes, Ukraine strikes back, targeting military objectives in Russian territory, because the only language this country understands is force. They also love to bring up Kherson and Zaporizhzhia. Newsflash: these are not Russian territory, just so we are clear. And of course, Solovyov is singing the same song. Sanctions don't work, the economy is just fine. Really? Russia's economy is only growing because it's hooked on a military drip. The budget pours cash into defense industry while everything else burns. It's not development, it's mobilization, overheating, inflation, labor shortages, falling real incomes. And when they say slow down is to fight inflation, lie. The system is breaking. Military overdrive is not a boom, it's delayed crash. Meanwhile, to make sure the Russian population doesn't ask awkward questions, although in a dictatorship, who even gets to ask? They feed them the same mantra over and over, explaining why this war had to happen.
We were forced to launch the special military operation to prevent the genocide of the Russian people in the Donbass. We had no other choice. It should be noted that Vladimir Vladimirovich, in addition to always impeccably structuring decision-making from a legal standpoint, as he himself has said, acts when there is no other option but to resort to decisive measures. In other words, he always assesses the risks. The fact that we were compelled to start the special military operation at this particular moment is linked both to our objective intelligence data about the growing support for the Ukrainian military by NATO countries and to plans to provide them with a wide variety of equipment, as well as the de facto establishment of various military facilities on Ukrainian territory. These can effectively be considered NATO infrastructure, which of course would have been immediately used against our country and posed an existential threat not only to the Donetsk People's Republic, Luhansk People's Republic, and Crimea, but also to Russia itself.
I think you remember the situation better than I do. Ukraine was not suddenly getting weapons from the West for no reason. At the start of 2022, when the Russian army was already massing at the borders for an attack, Ukraine received equipment, mostly for defense, and not nearly enough. Remember how Germany struggled to even start deliveries. At first, Ukraine only got helmets from Berlin. So what exactly is Moscow talking about when they screamed over armed? And NATO infrastructure? Complete nonsense. It's 2026. Kyiv is still not in NATO. And there is no sign of that changing anytime soon. But of course, to justify bloody war against their neighbor, Russia tells its citizens they are actually fighting NATO. And now they've cooked up another gem. Supposedly, France and the UK are preparing to hand nuclear weapons to Kyiv. Yeah, that's a claim, reported by Russian intelligence with zero evidence.
By the way, the enemy does not shy away from any other means. It has already appeared in the media, probably, their attempts or intentions to even use some kind of nuclear component. They probably understand what the consequences could be.
And if dictator Putin just tried to scare Europe in a hush-hush way with nuclear threats, well, Kremlin blogger, ex-President Dmitry Medvedev does it loud and proud. The kicker, there is zero evidence. They just want to wave their nuclear stick around. Honestly, it's déjà vu. Just like old fake stories from before the full-scale invasion. You know how Ukraine was supposedly being pumped up with weapons? Yeah, sure, totally believable.
The information from the Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation regarding France's and Britain's intention to transfer nuclear technologies to the Kyiv Nazi regime radically changes the situation, and this is not about the destruction of the NPT or some other issues in international law. This is a direct transfer of nuclear weapons to a country at war. There can be no shadow of a doubt that, in such a scenario, Russia would be forced to use any nuclear weapons, including tactical ones, against targets in Ukraine that pose a threat to our country, and, if necessary, against the supplying countries that become accomplices in a nuclear conflict with Russia. This is the symmetrical response to which the Russian Federation is entitled.
Of course, Russian TV did not ignore this story. In fact, they probably gave it main stage attention. Why not? In this made-up narrative, everything works perfectly for Russian propagandists. The West is the ultimate enemy, and surprise, surprise, another excuse to scare everyone with nukes. Because when things are not going well on the front, Putin is just stuck knee-deep in war. Well, apparently, this is the only one solution.
And here, the West has shown its true face. There should be no illusions about them. The policy they are currently pursuing could lead to what I have often said in this studio, though I was not believed, while I was simply outlining these scenarios objectively. I fear that, given the information received from the Foreign Intelligence Service, what other options do we really have left? And this is very sad. After all, what is the point of a world in which Russia does not exist?
This time, the main problem, apparently, is the United Kingdom. According to Moscow, it's not Russia that wants to sow chaos and start wars. Oh no, it's London. Convenient, right? And by the way, the fake stories about nuclear bombs being sent to Kyiv from London, not exactly new, but somehow they pop up with suspicious regularity.
First of all, France is on a leash held by the United Kingdom, which drags everyone else along. or rather, pushes the rest of Europe ahead to their deaths. What a remarkable setup. The United Kingdom's task is to send Ukraine and Europe to war with Russia, America to war with China, while the UK directs it all. That would be a dream. This is how every British gentleman sees himself, because his destiny is to lead people, politicians, and everyone else. He was born for this. He was educated for this.
The main enemy, of course, is Europe. Europe, the one supporting Ukraine. Europe helping Kyiv fight for its right to be an independent, sovereign, democratic country. Right now, Europe is basically Ukraine's main ally and partner, providing military, financial, and political support. And there is no doubt about it. Kyiv is grateful. But in Moscow, they are absolutely losing it over this.
Europe, whether anyone likes it or not, understands that on its territory, there is, of course, a full cycle that is now starting to operate in the interests of the Ukrainian military. They are openly showcasing Ukrainian-German drones that will be deployed. The British have provided their missiles, now called Flamingo. They are supplying equipment, are ready to provide nuclear warheads, and are supplying aircraft, both Swedish and French. Europe sees no problem in dealing with Russia at all, because everything it is doing now is like a pressure cooker within the Slavic community, where both Russians and Ukrainians are hated. They hardly distinguish between them, and they are destroying each other. Why should they worry? What damage does Europe see to itself? None.
And if there is any doubt that Russians are ready to make concessions, just watch this episode again. Listen closely to their so-called explanations for why they started a war against Ukraine. It's clearly a battle of two worlds, democracy versus dictatorship. And unfortunately, retreat is not on the agenda. They already talking about taking out Zelensky and openly saying they don't care how many Ukrainian civilians suffer from their mass attacks. Yeah, just brutal.
In my view, strikes should also be carried out against the military political leadership of Ukraine, up to and including its elimination, so that the next generation of political leadership immediately gets the idea. Do they really want such a war? Because apparently, these losses among Ukrainians do not concern them at all.
In any case, this armed struggle inherently implies the elimination of the military political leadership. In military practice, this is simply understood as follows. Strikes are carried out on the command points of the highest levels of leadership, and who happens to be affected in the process is considered a secondary or tertiary issue.
And while Russia keeps telling everyone how this war against Ukraine is their most successful military operation ever, here is the thing: they have not won, they've lost. And to really put the point across, use the language they understand, strengths, sanctions, and, even better, support for Ukraine. That's it for today. While the Russian propaganda machine keeps running, we'll keep exposing their lies. I'm Sofia, and this was Spin Snipers. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and don't fall for their spin.